The night before my college graduation, my father sent me a text message, not a phone call, a text. He said I was selfish, ungrateful, and unworthy of carrying his name, all because I did not give up one of my 4 graduation tickets for his new wife's children. That was the night I lost my father, my mother, my brother, and every aunt I thought I had. And 10 years later, when my father needed one signature on one document to save everything he had built, I wrote back 4 words. His entire retirement plan collapsed the next morning. My name is Indira. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. My parents divorced when I was 12, and my father remarried a woman named Patris 2 years later. Patris had 2 children from her previous marriage, Tyler and Bryn. From the moment Patris moved in, my father made it clear that his new family came first. I accepted that. I kept my grades up, worked 2 part-time jobs all through college, and never asked my father for a single dollar. I paid my own tuition, my own rent, my own groceries. For 6 years I built something entirely on my own, and the graduation ceremony was the one moment I let myself feel proud of that. Each student received exactly 4 tickets. I gave one to my father, one to my mother Donna, one to my older brother Arvid, and one to my maternal grandmother who had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and this was possibly one of the last celebrations she would ever attend. There were no extra tickets. I told my father this weeks in advance. He said he understood. Then the night before the ceremony, he sent that text. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from today. If this story already has your attention, go ahead and hit that like button right now and subscribe so you do not miss what comes after this. Because what I built in silence over the next 10 years, and what happened the day my father finally needed something from me, is something you are going to want to hear all the way to the end. I called my mother the moment I finished reading my father's text. I stood in the middle of my small rented apartment, holding the phone with both hands, and I waited for her to tell me my father was wrong. Donna picked up on the second ring. I explained everything, the 4 tickets, the reason for each one, the fact that I had told him weeks ago. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said I should think about how my father felt. She said Patris had been trying so hard to be part of our family. She did not ask me once how I felt. What she said next told me everything about where her priorities actually were. She reminded me that if my father stayed angry, he might stop the monthly support payment he still sent her. That was the end of that conversation. Within the next 2 hours, 3 text messages came in from my father's sisters, Gloria, Norma, and Bet. Gloria called me a troubled child who had always tried to divide the family. Norma said Tyler and Bryn were my siblings whether I accepted it or not, and that I had humiliated them. Bet sent a voice message saying she had always known I would turn out difficult. None of them asked for my side. None of them called to talk. They had already decided. Arvid showed up at my apartment that same night with his wife Zinnia. I thought for one moment that he had come to stand beside me. He had not. He told me our father had asked him to collect the car. The car was a 4-year-old sedan that my father co-owned with me after he offered to help me get it when I started college. I had made every single payment on that car myself. Arvid held out his hand for the keys and would not look at me directly. Zinnia stood in the doorway with her arms folded and said nothing. I handed the keys over because I had no legal ground to refuse, and I was not going to make a scene. Then Arvid told me the second thing. The apartment I was renting was listed under my father's name as the guarantor on the lease. My father had called the landlord and removed himself that afternoon. I had 7 days to vacate. I packed what I could into 2 old suitcases that night. My friend Marta, who I had lived with during sophomore year, said I could sleep on her floor until I figured out my next step. I carried those suitcases out of the building in the rain because I could not afford a cab and Arvid had already driven away with my car. The graduation ceremony was the next morning. I took the city bus, arrived with damp hair, sat in my cap and gown in a row of other graduates whose families filled the seats below, and I looked at the empty section where my 4 guests should have been. My grandmother had been too unwell to attend alone and no one brought her. The 4 seats were all empty. I walked across that stage, accepted my diploma, and sat back down without a single person in that auditorium there for me. 3 days later I was still on Marta's floor, going through job listings, when my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. A man introduced himself as Theodore Wynne, an attorney. He told me he represented the estate of my paternal grandfather, who had passed away 2 years before. He said my grandfather had established a private trust, and that I was the sole named beneficiary. No other family member had been informed of its existence. The trust was structured to release its full value on my 30th birthday. That was 9 years away. However, a smaller initial disbursement was available immediately to help me stabilize my situation. I asked Mr. Wynne why my grandfather had set it up this way, with no announcement, no family knowledge, no shared distribution. He told me my grandfather had watched for years how my father treated me. He did not trust his son to handle shared assets fairly. He had spoken with Mr. Wynne privately before his death and made his intentions clear. The trust was protected by structure. No family member could contest it or access its records. After I got off the phone, I sat on Marta's floor without moving for a long time. I did not call anyone. I took a blank sheet of paper from my bag and wrote down 3 things. Build something of my own. Do not let the family know. Wait until they need me. I folded the paper, put it in my wallet, and started making a plan. I used part of the initial disbursement from my grandfather's trust to buy a one-way bus ticket to Chicago. I arrived with $500 in cash, no job offer, and 2 suitcases. I found a shared room with 2 other renters and applied for every entry-level finance and operations position I could reach. Within 3 weeks, I was hired at a small logistics firm called Meridian Freight as a data analyst. I kept my head down for the first year. I studied how freight routing worked, where the inefficiencies were, how contracts were structured. By the 18-month mark, I had built a full optimization model for Meridian's delivery network that reduced their annual transportation costs by $300,000. I documented everything, time-stamped every version, kept copies on a personal encrypted drive. My direct manager, a man named Douglas Pell, presented my model to the executive team without mentioning my name. He received a performance bonus. I received nothing. When I raised the issue with the department head, I was told the work had been produced as part of my regular job duties and the intellectual property belonged to the firm. I did not argue further with internal management because I could see there was no path forward there. What I did instead was reach out directly to 2 of Meridian's largest clients, whose contracts I had personally restructured in the optimization model. I contacted their operations directors, introduced myself as the analyst who had built the system they were now benefiting from, and offered to do the same work for their supply chains independently at a lower annual cost than what they paid Meridian for full-service management. Both directors agreed to meet. Both signed contracts with me within 60 days. I used the income from those 2 contracts, combined with the annual disbursements the trust released on a scheduled basis, to register a holding company. I named it Apex Holdings. I did not put my name on any public-facing documents. I hired a man named Franklin Cross, a retired logistics executive with 30 years of regional credibility and a clean professional reputation, to serve as the public face of the company. Franklin understood his role. He represented Apex in meetings, signed documents I prepared, and attended events I could not attend without being recognized. Every strategic decision, every contract, every acquisition target came from me. The reason for this structure was specific. My father owned a mid-size commercial real estate management company in Atlanta called Garfield Property Group. His business model depended on attracting and retaining large commercial tenants who needed reliable logistics access. His plan for retirement was straightforward: build the company's value over the next decade, then sell it for enough to live comfortably with Patris for the rest of their lives. He had told Arvid this plan years ago, and Arvid had mentioned it to me once before the falling out, not knowing it would matter. I spent 2 years studying Garfield's client structure. I identified which major commercial tenants in the Atlanta region relied on third-party logistics partnerships brokered through or adjacent to Garfield's leasing arrangements. I then used Apex Holdings to offer those logistics clients better terms, faster delivery windows, and lower rates. They switched. When those tenants renegotiated their leases with Garfield, they did so from a position of reduced dependency on the location advantages Garfield had previously offered. Several did not renew at all. My father noticed the business slowdown but had no way to trace its source. He restructured his pricing, brought on a new marketing consultant, and told Patris the market was simply going through a difficult cycle. He was not wrong that the market was difficult. He was wrong about why his particular company was struggling more than his competitors. On the morning of my 30th birthday, I sat across from Theodore Wynne in his Chicago office and signed the final release documents for my grandfather's trust. The total value was $2,700,000, accumulated over 18 years of managed investment. I had not known the exact amount until that morning. Mr. Wynne slid the final summary page across the desk and left the room to give me privacy. I sat alone with that number in front of me and I cried. It was the first time I had cried about anything related to my family in almost a decade. Not because of the money, because my grandfather had set this in motion while he was still alive, knowing what was coming, and he had protected me the only way available to him. About 8 months after my 30th birthday, Franklin Cross forwarded me a meeting request that had come through Apex Holdings' General Inquiry Channel. A small consulting firm based in Atlanta called Arvid and Zinnia's company name, AZ Advisory Group, was seeking growth investment. They had been referred to Apex by a mutual contact in the Atlanta business network, who described Apex as a firm actively looking for regional investment opportunities. The request included a brief company overview and a request for a pitch meeting in Chicago. I read the overview twice. The company was Arvid's. He and Zinnia had started it 4 years after their wedding, and it had never grown beyond a handful of clients. The financials in the overview showed declining revenue for 2 consecutive years. They needed outside capital to survive. I told Franklin to schedule the meeting. I did not tell him who they were to me. The morning of the pitch, I arrived at the Apex offices early. I wore a grey suit, pulled my hair back tightly, and put on a pair of plain-framed glasses I did not need for vision. I sat at the far end of the conference table with a notepad, introduced as a senior strategy advisor. Franklin Cross sat at the head of the table. Arvid walked in first. He had aged in the way people do when years of moderate stress accumulate without resolution. Zinnia followed, carrying a presentation folder, dressed for a meeting she clearly believed would determine whether their business survived the year. Neither of them recognized me. I kept my posture neutral and my expression professional. Arvid presented for 20 minutes. The concept was not bad, but the financial projections had a significant problem. Their assumed client acquisition rate had no data to support it, and their target market analysis was 3 years out of date. There was no plan for what happened if the first 2 major clients they named did not convert. Zinnia handled the market section and she was sharper in her delivery, but the underlying numbers did not hold. When Arvid finished, Franklin asked 2 pointed questions about the revenue model. Arvid's answers revealed that he had not stress-tested his assumptions. Franklin said, clearly and without hostility, that Apex Holdings did not invest in proposals without demonstrated financial foundation. He thanked them for their time. Zinnia leaned forward and said she would appreciate speaking with whoever held final decision authority at the firm. Franklin turned his head toward me and said that I was that person. I took off my glasses and set them on the table. I looked at Arvid directly. He went completely still. I said, "We do not invest in what has no foundation." I gathered my notepad and walked out of the room. That evening my phone rang. I did not recognize the number, but I answered it. It was Arvid. He had gotten my personal number from Donna at some point and saved it. He did not say hello the way a person says hello when they have something genuine to offer. He asked me in a flat and careful voice why I had not told him I was behind Apex Holdings. I told him the same thing I had written on that piece of paper 10 years ago on Marta's floor. I said I had built this in silence because that was the only option available to me. I reminded him that he had not said a word the night he drove away with my car while I stood in the rain. He was quiet. I did not wait for a response. I ended the call. 6 weeks after the Chicago meeting, Franklin Cross forwarded me a formal inquiry that had come directly to Apex Holdings Acquisitions Department. A property owner in the greater Atlanta area was looking to sell a 50-acre parcel of undeveloped commercial land. The inquiry named the seller as Raymond Garfield, operating through Garfield Property Group. The asking price was above standard market rate for the area. The seller was requesting a fast close. I read it 3 times. My father did not know he was sending this inquiry to me. The 50-acre parcel was his backup plan. He had held it for years as the asset he would liquidate if the main Garfield business sale did not generate enough for retirement. He needed this sale. The fact that he was reaching out to outside buyers rather than working through his existing real estate contacts told me Garfield Property Group's cash position was in real trouble. Franklin confirmed the inquiry through official channels and expressed interest on behalf of Apex. A preliminary call was scheduled. Raymond spoke with Franklin directly and was satisfied with the initial conversation. An in-person meeting was proposed, framed as a standard due diligence visit before any term sheet was drafted. Raymond suggested holding it at his home in Atlanta over dinner, the way he had always done business with people he wanted to charm before they signed anything. I flew to Atlanta on a Tuesday morning. I left my Tom Ford suits in the Chicago closet. I wore a plain Zara blazer, low-heeled shoes, and minimal makeup. I introduced myself to Raymond's team as a junior due diligence coordinator from Apex. My role that evening was to observe, take notes, and say as little as possible. Raymond was in an expansive mood at dinner. Patris had prepared the meal and stayed in the room throughout. Raymond's personal attorney, Clifford Hale, sat to his left. Franklin Cross handled the conversation from Apex's side. I sat 2 seats away from Raymond with a small notebook and a pen. Raymond drank 3 glasses of wine over the course of the meal. As the conversation moved from pleasantries to the property itself, Raymond became increasingly candid. He talked about his long-term plan for the land, how he had held it for years waiting for the right buyer. Then he said something that I had not expected him to say in a room with people he barely knew. He told Franklin that the parcel's tax filings had been structured conservatively over the years to reduce his assessed value and lower his annual tax burden. He used the word conservatively. I wrote down the exact phrase he used. He also mentioned, as a kind of casual aside meant to signal his local influence, that several of Garfield's commercial contracts over the years had been facilitated through informal arrangements with 2 county officials whose names he said out loud. He was trying to impress Franklin with his network. He did not notice that I was writing every word. The device recording the conversation was a small unit built into the second button on my blazer. I had tested it twice before the flight and confirmed it captured clear audio at conversational volume across a standard dining room. When Raymond pushed the preliminary agreement across the table for Franklin to initial as a show of good faith, I reached for my water glass and knocked Raymond's wine glass directly onto the document. The spill covered the entire page. I apologized immediately and offered to clean it up. Clifford Hale said the document would need to be reprinted. I suggested that since both parties would need fresh copies, it made sense to revisit the specific terms before the next meeting rather than initial something that would need to be revised anyway. Hale agreed that was reasonable. Raymond was irritated but could not object to the logic. We left that night with no signed document and a follow-up meeting scheduled for the following week. During the 7 days between that dinner and the formal signing meeting, my legal team worked continuously. They pulled 15 years of Garfield Property Group's publicly available tax filings and cross-referenced the parcel's assessed value history against comparable properties in the same county. The pattern of undervaluation was systematic and extended well beyond what could be attributed to aggressive but legal tax planning. They identified the 2 county officials Raymond had named and found documented evidence of contract awards that correlated directly with the timeline of Garfield's informal arrangement history. Theodore Wynne confirmed that the trust assets were entirely separate from any Raymond Garfield holdings and that there was no legal complication in Apex Holdings proceeding as an adverse party in a transaction involving my father. By the morning of the scheduled signing meeting, 4 separate filings had already been submitted, 2 to the Internal Revenue Service's Civil Enforcement Division, 1 to the State Revenue Department, and 1 to the County Inspector General's office. I did not submit them myself. My legal team handled the filings as part of their standard due diligence reporting obligation under the terms of Apex Holdings' compliance policy. Raymond would not know about any of this until he arrived at the meeting. The formal signing meeting was held at Clifford Hale's law office on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Raymond had asked Patris to come. He had also called Arvid, who arrived with Zinnia. Donna was there because Raymond had told her she should witness the close of what he described as the deal that would secure his retirement. Gloria, Norma, and Bet were all present. Raymond had framed this meeting as a celebration, the moment his long-term plan would finally convert into financial security. He wanted an audience. I arrived 7 minutes after the scheduled start time. I walked in wearing the Tom Ford suit I had left in Chicago on the previous trip. My hair was down. I had 4 attorneys with me and a financial forensics specialist named Dr. Paulette Reyes, who had spent the previous 5 days reviewing everything my legal team had compiled. The room was already full when I entered. Raymond looked up expecting Franklin Cross. He saw me instead. He did not speak. Patris turned in her chair. Donna raised her hand to her mouth. Gloria said my name out loud in a voice that held more confusion than anything else. Arvid went still the same way he had in the Chicago conference room, but this time there was no performance on his face, just recognition of what was about to happen. Clifford Hale, acting in his capacity as the neutral party managing the document signing, asked for the buyer representative from Apex Holdings to identify themselves for the record. I placed my business card on the conference table and said 4 words. I am the buyer. Dr. Reyes opened her file and my lead attorney, a woman named Constance Okafor, began distributing bound document sets to everyone in the room. Constance explained, without raising her voice at any point, that Apex Holdings had completed its due diligence review and had identified material concerns that required disclosure before any transaction could proceed. She outlined the 15-year pattern of assessed value discrepancies in the tax filings for the 50-acre parcel. She named the specific county officials whose informal arrangements with Garfield Property Group were documented in the evidence set. She stated the dates of the 4 regulatory filings that had been submitted that morning. Clifford Hale read through the first 2 pages of the document set and then set it down on the table. He looked at Raymond and said he needed to advise his client privately before the meeting continued. Raymond said nothing. Constance told Hale that Apex Holdings was still prepared to proceed with the acquisition, but under revised terms. The purchase price would reflect the property's accurate assessed value after correcting the 15-year undervaluation history, which reduced the price by 40% from Raymond's original asking figure. Garfield Property Group would also be required to submit to a full independent audit before any funds transferred. If Raymond chose not to proceed under these terms, the regulatory filings that had already been submitted would proceed on their own timeline without any further involvement from Apex Holdings. Arvid stood up. He said this was personal. He said I had orchestrated this to destroy the family out of anger over something that happened 10 years ago. I turned and looked at him and said, "This is a business transaction. The filings were made because the evidence required it. That is not personal, that is compliance." He sat back down. Raymond did not speak for several minutes. Hale stepped out of the room with him briefly. When they returned, Hale said his client wished to proceed under the revised terms. Raymond sat down at the table. He signed the amended purchase agreement on every page that required his signature. When he finished, he looked up at me and said my name, just my name, nothing else. I nodded once, collected the signed originals and walked out with my team. The audit of Garfield Property Group took 11 months. The final assessment required Raymond to pay back taxes and penalties that consumed the majority of the liquid savings he had set aside for retirement. The sale of the 50-acre parcel at the reduced price covered his immediate obligations, but left nothing resembling the cushion he had planned his post-work life around. The informal arrangement with the 2 county officials resulted in separate proceedings that kept his company under scrutiny for an additional 2 years. Garfield Property Group did not sell as a going concern the way Raymond had planned. It was wound down. Arvid and Zinnia's consulting firm closed 6 months after the Chicago pitch meeting. The connection between that closure and the Apex meeting was not something I caused. Their financial problems had been building long before they walked into my conference room. Gloria, Norma, and Bet did not reach out to me after the signing. I heard from Marta that Gloria had told someone in the family that what I had done was cold. I did not respond to that. Donna called me once about 3 months after the signing. She did not apologize. She did not mention the graduation or the apartment or the car or the phone call where she told me to think about my father's feelings. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was and I wished her well. That was the complete conversation. I went back to Chicago. I sat in my office at Apex Holdings and I did not feel what I thought I would feel when I was 21 years old standing in the rain holding 2 suitcases. I had imagined that moment of accountability would feel like relief. What it actually felt like was quiet, not emptiness, just the absence of waiting. I opened the drawer of my desk and took out the folded piece of paper I had carried in my wallet for 10 years. The paper with 3 lines written on it the morning after the graduation on Marta's floor. I read it one more time. Then I placed it in the trash. The hurt from that night does not disappear because a contract got signed. My father's signature on a document did not give me back the 4 empty seats at the graduation ceremony. It did not give me back the years I spent wondering what I had done wrong before I understood I had done nothing wrong. What that day gave me was the end of a question I had been carrying. What would happen when they finally needed something from me? Now I know. and I do not need to carry that question anymore. I want to ask you something before you go. If you were in my position with that one document in front of you and 10 years of silence behind you, what would you have written back? Would you have signed it? Would you have walked away entirely? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like. It takes 1 second and it means more than you know. Share this with someone who has ever been told they were the problem in a situation where they were not. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now so you are here for the next story. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. You gave your time to this and I do not take that lightly. Take care of yourself out there. You deserve the kind of loyalty you give.